Hi, welcome to Exploring the Illusion of Free Will. My name is George Ortega, and today is Tuesday, July 22nd, 2014, and this is episode number 165, and the title is Free Will, Refutation, Cost, Role in Climate Change Denial, Part 5. Okay, this is Part 5 of a series that I'm going through this book that I published in April 2014, just a few months ago, titled Free Will, Its Refutation, Societal Cost, and Role in Climate Change Denial. And basically the theme of this book is that, a lot of people are beginning to understand that, yes, we don't have a free will. Free will is an illusion, absolutely nothing is up to us, everything is a movie. But then they say to themselves, so what? It just doesn't matter. And so this book is kind of like trying to explain. Now, I'll go through it briefly, because basically the thesis of the book is that it matters greatly, because what happens is, this is important, it might take a few minutes, but all right. According to a Pew Research poll done earlier this year, 66% of Americans deny that climate change is happening and that human beings are causing it, okay? With only 1/3 of Americans buying into this thing, we can't do anything about climate change. And climate change is, threatening the civilization as we know it. It's threatening the lives of billions of people, and the more we wait to do what we need to do about it, the worse it's going to become. All right, so then you ask yourself, why are these people in denial? And there's perhaps other reasons. For example, if you own an oil company and you're making a lot of money on oil, then you may be in denial that it's happening because of self-interest. Because, if you admit it to yourself, whatever, and you admit it to a world, then you might make less money. All right, that may be one reason. But that I think reason pertains to relatively few people. I think the majority of people, I believe, are in denial of climate change because these scientists are telling them you are responsible, your action and the action of your friends, your family are responsible for the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced, and this threat is going to continue for decades, and it threatens to quite literally destroy the civilization we know. Okay, so what happens is when people are faced with this threat, because basically the threat is pretty much everybody believes in free will here in the United States. Very few people don't. So people are kind of saying, you of your own free will are doing this. And when the scientists say this to people, they begin to feel guilty. They begin to feel really bad. We have a need, and I'm going to get into this later in the book, on the implications of belief and disbelief in free will. It's the next chapter. But what happens is when people's self-image is threatened, people like to believe they're good people. When scientists are telling them you're doing something so immoral, so fundamentally, you're basically destroying the livelihoods of billions of people in the future, people can't deal with that. It's too much of an indictment. It's too much of an accusation for them to handle. It makes them feel so guilty that what they do, and they do this unconsciously, because that's how our mind works, is they resort to denial. They will deny the threat, what the scientists are telling us. So in this case, they're denying that climate change is happening because they can't deal with the guilt. And so here's where the free will connection comes in. Guilt, in order to feel guilty about something, you have to feel fundamentally, morally responsible for having done it. In other words, you have to believe in free will. If for example, the scientists were telling people, listen, telling the entire public, we understand that you don't have a free will. No one has a free will because it's an illusion. We've never had it, we never will. But our behavior as a humanity, as a global population, is placing not just future generations. It's also if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, the climate change is going to be affecting the next 10, 20 years. And who knows, if we're lucky, maybe not all that much, but who knows? But if the scientists tell people that we know that it's not your fault because you don't have free will, but all this stuff is threatening us, then people are not going to feel guilty. People are not going to feel indicted. People are not going to feel accused. They won't have to deny. They won't, their unconscious won't have to deny this threat because they're not being threatened. Their self-identity, their self-images are being threatened. And so the hope is, by overcoming this illusion of free will, this 66% of Americans, and presumably many people throughout the world, that that are in denial that climate change is happening and that we're causing it will finally be able to face this fact, and once we face the fact, then we can begin to really, you know, make substantial efforts on mitigating and adapting to it. All right, so that's the thesis. All right, so now, so in order to make this claim that free will belief is causing climate change denial, because that's what the logic tells us, you know, a lot of this book goes into demonstrating, showing why free will is impossible, why we don't have it. And like the last chapters, I basically did that relative to this principle of law, this law of cause and effect. And I'm going to use that same law in this next chapter. Again, it's chapter 3, Refutation of Published Free Will Defenses. But what I do is I take 4 published articles that were published within the last several years. I think there's a couple in 2008, one in 2011, and I don't know, they're pretty recent. So we're going to start off with an art, and what I do is I basically present the defenses of free will that these psychologists or doctors or philosophers offer, because they're in different disciplines, and I basically take the arguments apart and refute them, just show how they're logically mistaken, they're false. All right, so we'll start with an article that Roy Baumeister published in 2008. This book, incidentally, has 50 references. You know, like the book is heavily referenced. It's a scholarly work. If you think it's an easy read, no, it's not a popular work. It's a scholarly work, but it's mainly directed toward academians, you know, who are in the position to kind of like move the thesis along, to study more about it. Okay, so like the paper is called, the article is called Free Will in Scientific Psychology, and it was published again by Roy Baumeister in 2008 in a peer-reviewed journal called Perspectives on Psychological Science. Okay, so that is the paper we're exploring, and chances are you can actually get it online. I don't have it I published all this also through Kindle. And I think the hyperlinks, you can probably hyperlink directly to the article there. But anyway, you can get it. So here's how Baumeister frames the question. You know, I'm quoting him. Is the person an autonomous entity who genuinely chooses how to act from among multiple options, or is the person essentially just one link in a causal chain, so that the person's actions are merely the inevitable product of lawful causes stemming from prior events, and no one could have ever acted differently than how he or she actually did? So basically saying, do we have a free will, or is everything caused? Another way he's framing it is like, could we have done otherwise? Because that's what he's doing. Basically for his first defense, and this is on page 11 of the book, he's referring to a defense of free will called the principle of alternate possibilities, that says, well, we could have, you know, the fact that, like, let's say I had a grapefruit for breakfast today, you know, the fact that I could have had an orange if I wanted to, or I could have not had any breakfast if I wanted to, I could have done otherwise, means that I have free will. Okay, that's the defense. We're going to just like tear that apart because it makes no sense at all. Okay, there's 2 ways. So on page 12, I begin to refute it. There's 2 ways to answer this free will defense. The first answer is that no, you could not have chosen otherwise. You had to choose that grapefruit because the universe evolved in the way that made you choose the grapefruit. In other words, a way to understand this, you know, there's only one known universe, and there's only one known chain of cause and effect. And the way to understand this is, as I explained before, maybe in the last episode, you've got the Big Bang that is the first known event in the universe. Okay, it causes the state of the universe at the next moment. That second state of the universe causes the state of the universe at the next moment. And the third state of the universe causes the state of the universe at the fourth moment. The fourth state of the universe causes the state of the universe at the fifth moment. Are you getting this? So because like the universe is the only thing that can cause its own evolution through time. So you've got, this causal chain of the universe at one moment causing the state of the universe at the next. And here's the thing to understand. It's not anything that's happening, for example, within the second moment of the universe was caused by the Big Bang. Anything that happened within the fifth moment of the universe was most proximately caused by the state of the universe in the fourth moment, and then it was of course, most fundamentally caused by the Big Bang. But so every event within any moment of the universe is also caused by the preceding states of the universe. All right, so according to that understanding, you couldn't have chosen otherwise. This is what I refer to in italics as a real-world refutation of the PAP challenge. The PAP is the principle of alternate possibilities, okay? So no, you couldn't have. That's the illusion. The illusion is to think that you could have. That's the illusion of free will. So basically what they're saying is well, I have a free will because I believe I have a free will, because it seems to me I have a free will. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay, alternately, you could answer his question, well, yes, you could have chosen differently. I could have chosen an orange rather than a grapefruit for breakfast, but I could have done so only theoretically. In other words, if the universe had evolved differently, or if my life had evolved differently, or if I was in a different universe, then yes, I could have chosen differently, but the universe did not evolve differently, and I'm not in a different universe, and my life did not evolve differently, obviously. So while in theory, logical theory in a sense, we could have acted differently, it would only be in circumstances that don't exist. Being in a different universe, being a different person, having a different life. So all right, so that pretty much answers that. Okay. His Baumeister's next defense, again, we're on page 12. He's now invoking Kant's, Kant is supposed to be a pretty sharp guy, philosopher, but he couldn't come to terms. He understood the logic of why we don't have free will, but he couldn't accept it. So he redefined free will. You can't do that. This guy's a philosopher. He should know better. It's called a straw man argument. So basically, he redefines free will to say well, we have a free will where, in Baumeister's words, I'm using his words now because it's his article, that we are, quote, acting in a morally virtuous manner based on enlightened reasoning. All right, so think about it. The premise is if we're acting in a moral manner, if we're acting morally, we have a free will, and if it's not based on quote unquote enlightened reasoning, whatever that might be, then we have a free will, and if we're not, we don't. That is an absurd claim. It's an absurd defense. And the easiest way to refute it, because I don't get into the more details on this, I simply refute it by saying, well, this moral, virtuous manner, this enlightened reasoning, is not exempt from the law of causality. In other words, the reasoning and the virtue would have causes, okay? And as such, because they have causal antecedents, they would regress back to the Big Bang. So these decisions would therefore not be freely willed. Very straightforward refutation of this free will defense. Okay, again, even if you call the decision moral, that, the decisions being moral does not in any way somehow exempt it from being caused. And again, you can't have it be freely willed if it's not caused, because, then it wouldn't be caused by anything. And if it is caused, free will, again, remember, means that we are causing the moral decision in this case. So as soon as you introduce causality, you introduce a chain of cause and effect that regresses back to before we were born and makes this moral decision not freely willed and impossibly freely willed. Okay. So, all right, now, again, at the bottom of page 12, we got about 12 minutes left. We got time. This is weird. This is, again, the kinds of, distorted arguments that these guys come up with to try to defend free will. It's somewhat embarrassing, because these guys are PhDs. It's a little scary because, for example, in philosophy, more than 50% of philosophers believe they have a free will, but they do the same thing Kant does. They change the meaning of the word free will, and even that doesn't work, but they still don't get it. But anyway, here's what Baumeister next asserts. He says, quote, "Free will should be understood not as the starter or motor of action, but rather as a passenger who occasionally grabs the steering wheel, or even as just the navigator who says to turn left up ahead," unquote. This is on page 14 of his paper, of his article. But what Baumeister doesn't understand is causality doesn't allow this kind of interference, this passenger who occasionally grabs the steering wheel, or the navigator who occasionally says to turn left up ahead. Causality, in other words, and I use an example of this. I use dominoes. Let's say you have a series of a quadrillion dominoes. We're on page 13 now. Okay, quadrillion dominoes. Okay, now causality says that the first domino in this series of a quadrillion dominoes completely determines the toppling of the quadrillionth domino. In other words, you've seen dominoes topple each other, right? So that's how it works. In other words, causality doesn't allow for either a break or interference with this causal chain. In other words, you can't have the 98th domino not be influenced by the next to last of the quadrillionth domino be influenced by anything other than the preceding dominoes, the dominoes that toppled in sequence, regressing back to the first one. Causality doesn't allow for breaks or interferences with a causal chain. Okay, that's clear. All right, and so that pretty much answers that. All right, now another very strange, perplexing defense that he comes up with, and again, these are amazingly creative, but they're so amazingly illogical. You have to wonder. So he references this guy Gallwitzer, who in 1999 wrote an article that suggests that, in Baumeister's words, quote, "Free will would have more to do with deciding now to walk to the store when the rain stops, parentheses later, end parentheses, than with directing each footstep during the actual trip," end quote. Okay, this is Baumeister, page 15. So you know what's he saying? He's saying if we make a decision that's not based on a current action, but it's based on a future action, then that can be freely willed. It's absurd. It's completely illogical. Causality doesn't allow for that. In other words, if I make a decision about what I'm going to do immediately, or I'm going to make a decision about what I'm going to get for dinner tonight, that decision is going to have causes. It's not just the fact that it's about dinner tonight, or what I'm going to do over the weekend doesn't exempt that decision from causality. And how does he not get this? That's it's completely perplexing. But that's another mystery. In other words, one of the perhaps a bigger mystery than the fact that we don't really have a free will is how these guys that got PhDs that write. Baumeister has had 500 articles published. He's like a quote unquote eminent psychologist. For these guys to not get this, that is a powerful mystery. Then actually they do understand this. There's a science writer, Chris Mooney, who compiled the findings of what's referred to as motivated reasoning. Okay, he published a book recently called The Republican Brain, and it's something the Republicans tend to do more than Democrats, but everybody does it. And what happens is a lot of times when we're making political decisions or decisions in general, we think we're objectively evaluating the data, the evidence, and making our decisions based on that. No, we're basically making our decisions based on our worldview, based on what we emotionally need to be true. Okay, so and so that's what these academics must be doing. It's unfortunate because it's completely unscientific, and you can understand if the lay public of non-academians do this, but for scientists to do this, it's just it's unforgivable. I mean, you forgive them because they don't have a free will. But all right. All right, so like now he goes to another kind of like really, really absurd free will defense. He cites an experiment by Galliot, Baumeister, he was in on this one, DeWall, Manor, Plant, and some other guys in 2007. And I'm going to read this because it's so absurd. They're suggesting that through raising blood glucose levels by drinking lemonade, one can regain a measure of the depleted free will. All right? In other words, he say that like they say in this study that our free will is diminished because actually, I'm going to read from before that. This paper proposes that the waning of self-control subsequent to its exercise during a previous task is due to the waning of free will. They don't understand the concept of free will. Right? In this instance, they're conflating will with free will. In other words, like sometimes we have the willpower. You ever like want to really study, you study for a test or something, and if you have the willpower to really focus, to really concentrate, right? And you do it and you're studying well and it feels great and all. Other times you're tired, you're distracted, you just don't want to study for whatever reason. You don't have that willpower. That's not free will. That's about willpower. It's a completely different topic. So like anyway, these guys are saying that if you do a task, and you repeat it, or it's a task after another task, that your free will is depleted, and if you drink lemonade, you're going to have more glucose in your system that's going to give you more free will. It's too absurd. I mean, the guy is an academician and says this. It's just funny. I'm sorry. All right. We're done with Baumeister. Again, we're on page 13. And so now we're moving to a philosopher. Baumeister is a psychologist. And his name is Herbert Fingeret, I believe, and he published an article in 2008, and let me go through my references and find exactly what that article is. Okay, it's on page 35. All right, he published an article called Free Choice. Actually, maybe he is a psychologist. I think he's a philosopher, but anyway, this article is published in he's a psychologist, I'm sorry. It's published in Current Psychology in 2008. All right, so the name of the article is called Free Choice. All right, and okay, his first point is kind of like, it's beside the point. Basically, he basically deems the matter mute. He says like, it doesn't matter whether we believe we have a free will or not. Because then he says, quote, he deems the matter moot, inconsequential. He says, quote, I cannot live my life on a deterministic basis. Deterministic meaning on the principle that everything has a cause and all that. Asserting, nor can you. If you are alive, you are conscious of making choices. Okay, that's on page 3 of his thing. All right, my answer to that, I cite this guy Breer, who wrote a book in 1989, this guy Paraboom, who wrote a book in 2011, this woman Blackmore, who wrote a book in 2005, and my own experience in saying that no, you can act under the understanding that everything is predetermined, that absolutely nothing is up to us. And what I say is that, I'll quote myself here, however, it is possible to integrate the understanding that one's choices are deterministic. Integrating the perspective is as straightforward as actively reminding oneself of the causal nature of one's choices and shifting one's cognitive and emotional responses to reflect the corollary that in their conventional application of personal guilt, blame, arrogance, and envy do not any longer make sense. So in other words, what I'm saying is like, yes, in other words, like, you can live under the reality. You can overcome the illusion that we have a free will. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy to do this automatically, because in my experience it's not. And actually, when, goodness willing, the world, we all understand this, it'll be much easier, because what makes it really hard is because so much in the media, so much in literature and all assumes we have free will, so it gets very confusing. So basically the idea to overcoming the illusion of free will is you remind yourself, somebody does something wrong to you, right? A friend of yours says something that's hurtful, okay? Rather than saying, oh, you have a free will, you're being immoral, you deserve that I do something back to you, rather than focusing on the person, you realize, wait a minute, this person did it, right? And I may have to address it in some way or another. I may have to talk to them. But you also understand that the person was compelled to say what they said. What they said wasn't up to them. It's kind of as if they were as if they had an electrode implanted in their brain, and somebody with a walkie-talkie or something was making them say what they said. So what's the importance of this? You wouldn't be angry at your friend for having said that. You might be angry at the person with the electrode, or in this case, the universe that made the person do that. So again, it is relatively straightforward, and it's not easy, but it's straightforward to shift from the perspective, from the illusion that we have free will, to the understanding that we don't, that everything is completely causal. And it's just, then the idea is the more you do this, the more, and actually in my life, I find it works. People do things, I hear things, I read things of people saying, immoral things, hurtful things and all. And I say to myself, well, I don't become angry at them as much. And I still remain kind of frustrated or disappointed that the universe would have had them do that, because I don't understand why that would be, to begin with. But at least it preserves my relationship with people, because we don't really relate to the universe. The universe is just what makes us do stuff. We relate to other people. So to the extent we understand this, we conserve and preserve and maintain healthier relationships with the people around us. All right, we're running out of time, so we're on page 14. And so, again, in the next episode, we'll continue to refute Fingeret's 2008 paper defending free will, and then we'll go on. This book has 56 pages. Actually, there's about 30. It's a brief book because I wanted to make it concise because people don't have much of an attention span, whatever. But it's actually only 31 pages, and the rest is references. And so maybe we'll get through this sooner than I thought. So we're on episode number 5. We might have a few more episodes, but I'll continue with the refutation of free will defenses by Fingeret next time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time on Exploring the Illusion of Free Will.